Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind, the retro video game show coming to you live every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern right here on the AWS Games channel on YouTube and Twitch. Now look, I know you're asked about this on just about every video on YouTube and Twitch, but please hit that like, subscribe, and alert button so you know we go live every week. And this really helps the channel. Which buttons are those? It's those little ones animating right up there. My name is Chris Velocinos, and I'm the Principal Evangelist for Video Games here at AWS. And on this episode of Rewind, well, we're going to take a little bit of a different tack. I was away actually supporting a WebXR event between AWS and Meta and took the redeye back home to the East Coast. So I'm running on about 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours of sleep. So I figured I'd take it a little easy on myself and you, and we're going to walk through a bit of ephemera that I find incredibly nostalgic and just absolutely love, which are video game magazines. Something that we just really don't dig into anymore, just because there aren't very many of them around anymore, right? With the amount of information we have about video games and programming and access to all of this content available at the tips of our fingers on any device, video game magazines have just kind of gone away. But back in the heyday of video game magazines, that is how you got all of the information that you needed about the games that were going to be coming out, the things you could expect, game journalists talking about, what was going to be big in the next generation of game consoles. But also, this is where those of us that started programming on home computers in the early days of home computing, we're talking about late 70s and early 80s, these are the kind of magazines that we use to start learning how to program. So I absolutely love looking through them. I love the fact that I still have a collection of them, and I constantly go back and revisit that bit of nostalgia from my childhood and growing up in the games industry. So I thought I would go ahead and share a bunch of my favorite video game magazines with you. If they're ones that you like and you happen to be watching right now, go ahead and hit me up there in the chat. Let me know what you want to see or share your favorite memories about video game magazines when you were a kid. So let's go ahead and jump on over to let's go ahead and jump over and start looking at some of these video game magazines from the past. Here we go. All right, and here we are. Now, I also want to apologize a little bit. Like I said, I had been traveling for work, and I didn't have enough time to go ahead and actually put together all the scenes that I want. So we're just going to be using the same scene that I use here for the 8-bit living room, but I've got this nice flat area here that we can go ahead and start looking through these magazines. So I have an entire stack of them here. I don't think I'm going to be able to get through all of these today, but I will be able to get through a bunch of them. And again, if there's ones that you want to see or ones that meant the most to you, tell us those stories right there in the chat, right? This is super important. So I'm going to start off with the video game magazines that were really available to us at the dawn of computer games. One of the most important ones were electronic games. Now, these two magazines that I have right here are from 1982. And what you'll notice about video games in this or video game magazines in this era is that a lot of the artwork that you saw in the magazines around the games were actually drawn by the magazine, right? Or, and it's going to be very obvious once we start digging in here, you can tell they were shot like on a Polaroid camera and then slapped into the magazine by the editor, and so they're really low quality. But there's just something lovely about it, because those same games, when you bought them at the store, they had that hand-drawn art by the developer on the box art and everything else, right? So it kind of matched up with what you saw in the magazine and what you got in the store. So let's go ahead and jump into the first one here. So here we have, Intellivision right here on the front of it. And, even back then, we were looking at hacking up, the consoles that we owned and the devices that we had. You'll notice here, customize your Coleco Pac-Man. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we come in here, look at the way we used to advertise these games. M Network, by the way, was the branding of the Intellivision video games that Intellivision made for the Atari VCS. So they took their kind of Real Sports Football line, Real Sports Baseball, those types of games, Tron, Discs of Tron, those sorts of things, and created ports to the Atari VCS or the Atari 2600, as a lot of people know it to be, and did them under the brand of M Network, right? So here we go, Space Cavern. I do remember seeing this when I was a kid and really wanting to go and get my hands on it. It's like, what the hell is Space Cavern? You'll see here, Spectravision. Now, when I said before, we had screenshots or photographs of the playfield. You can see, like, in the Pac-Man playfield here, it's kind of blurry, right? Not just because of my camera, but because that was just basically taking a photo of the arcade screen. You can see it's not exactly straight in the frame there, right? So editors and writers back then had to go ahead and do whatever they could to get these images into the magazine. Remember, too, this is 1982, right? Yeah, what I said. So Tron was just coming out back then, and this blew our minds, right? That we had a movie about being inside the virtual world and being inside a video game. Really, really extraordinary. And, this is the era, too, when you think about games and game content and characters and these sorts of things. Like, companies are trying to figure out how to go ahead and utilize those in a whole variety of products, because now video games are becoming part of our culture, but a lot of companies just didn't understand what they were. So they tried all kinds of crazy things. You'll see, like Hallmark cards, right, for Pac-Man that were in there. Oh, and they had things like, the LCD-based games. There's, which one was that? Frisky Tom. Yeah, let's go through and see here. Oh, here's your National Vanity Board. I guess what they were calling the high score board back then. You would go ahead and fill that out and send it in to go ahead and get your score in the next magazine. Yeah, here you go. Win $10,000. There's $40,000 in prizes here from a Magic, which was started by Rob Fulton, who had left Atari and started, I think it was the second third-party game developer to focus on the Atari VCS. The first one, of course, being Activision, right? The mighty Activision. And like I was saying, when we started here, they'd even do little, section here about how to customize your hardware to, your desktop to go ahead and do things like, well, add a second joystick to your little Coleco tabletop arcade, or to add a power adapter. So here we go. This is the video command stick with a 9-pin adapter right in here. And so you're hacking up these machines. Now, of course, as a preservationist, you wouldn't want to hack all these things up. You want to keep them as pristine and original as you possibly can. But, back then we didn't realize if these things, we didn't realize they were going to be valuable, or didn't know if they were or not. And so, yeah, we taught you how to cut that stuff up. Again, if you have any memories about video game magazines, specific issues, articles that you read, now make sure you share them in the comments there. You had a Q&A section, and I mean, look at these, Supercharger Atari, these crazy ass controllers that just had basically single buttons in that try to mimic arcade games like Asteroids, for example, right? And then again, a lot of hand-drawn art that we just didn't see in game magazines in the the later part of their existence, except when we looked at things like Nintendo Power, which we're also going to go ahead and talk about, little black and white in their pages. Go ahead and save money on printing in color. But yeah, these were the system or the magazines that we waited for every month, right? If you grew up waiting for that magazine subscription to show up, right? It was all about what's going to be the next big thing, tell us what we should be looking for. And then you had to wait a whole other month. So this was all the information that you had to sustain you for that month. And now if you had other friends that got different magazines, they'd go ahead and share different articles with you, on the playground at school and stuff like that. And so the magazines really kind of help bridge that community of face-to-face interaction around game discussion, right? So yeah, here we go. Which ones? The cartridges that will soon be playing Pac-Man for the Atari 5200. In television, what did they have? Frog Bog, Utopia, the first RTS for a console at home, done by the mighty and incredible Don Daglow. That's right, Don. Good shout out to you there, buddy. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and then Deadly Disc, Solar Sailor, and Mazatron. I loved Mazatron when I was a kid, but couldn't figure the damn thing out then. Could barely figure it out now. But again, here's the artwork that you saw. These aren't screenshots, right? These are artists' interpretations of what the game was going to look like. And then, of course, you had these video game distributors that would go ahead and just put their catalog of games out there into the magazine with prices that were fixed there. We talk about the price of video games today. Here we are back then, 1982, for Bally and Astrovision, Astrocade games, $27.50, $34.95. Like, go ahead and translate that in today's dollars. They're more expensive than even the most expensive games that we have today. This is what it was like back then, right? So when you got that game at home, because you weren't getting games every month. You got a game for your birthday. You got a game for Christmas. You got a game for graduation from elementary school. That game had to sustain you for months, right? So you wound up building kind of a lending library of games with your friends that you could go ahead and trade with each other because they were just too expensive, even back then, right? So the value that we get for the price of games today, pretty fantastic. Yeah, so this is what, the earliest video game magazines look like. Again, a lot of hand-drawn art and trying, again, to figure out where video games fit into the rest of society and with different products and things like that. I mean, look at this collection of shirts, hats, software, system accessories, tabletop games. Oh, man, it's just so awesome to go back and look at this. Oh, look at that crazy-ass Mattel NFL football. Look at this. I'll get this a little closer to the camera there. Oh, my goodness. Look at that. But then Odyssey football, the Odyssey 2, right? Definitely more powerful machine, the Atari VCS, but just didn't have the right type of titles on there, And there's the Atari 2600 football, which was the next version of football. The first one that looked like this. Yeah, not so good. But they did get better over time as game developers learned how to go and squeeze more out of game systems, right? The games got a whole lot better. All right, so here we are. Computer football, the magnificent look of Tron. I mean, my mind was blown as a kid when I read, the Tron exposés. I don't have the Tron edition of electronic games with me here. That one is actually safely ensconced in a nice bag put away in my collection at home. But yeah, pretty fantastic. Look at the way Intellivision was going after Atari back then. Apparently, George Plimpton is the only one who can see the difference. And if you go back and you take a look at the earliest game ads like this, yeah, Intellivision was going ahead and, kind of sticking it to Atari in those ads. And when I said they just took pictures of the television screen, what you can see is this discoloration that you see in the image here. That is because you're using a camera to take a picture off a CRT. That's not in the print. That is the image that Intellivision used, just taking a picture of the television screen, playing the game for them to use in the ad. The same thing here. You can see kind of the discoloration going from left to right in Atari football. Again, that's not because of the age of the magazine. That was taking a picture of a CRT back then. And that's what it looked like. But that's all they had. There were no capture cards. There was no way to go ahead and get it off of a dev system and put it into an image there. pretty awesome, right? And I said, so as they even did things like, let's take a look inside of the world of Tron. We started with the Video Game Hall of Fames, right? So these were the very first game magazines that I remember getting as a kid. You can imagine, when you're 10, 11, 12 years old, pouring through this magazine in that era, man, I mean, just your imagination was completely lit up. And, you had to kind of take it into your room and hide under your sheets with a flashlight so your parents didn't yell at you because you weren't going to sleep. You were reading your video game magazines. And look at the way we advertise things. Astrocade, three, count them, 1, 2, 3, built-in games, a built-in calculator, a 3-octave music synthesizer, 256 color variations, 4-player capability, and basic programming, because if that's what you wanted to do. It was all built in to the Bally Astrocade. So this was, again, the first video game magazine that I really remember getting. I mentioned that we were also trying to figure out at that time, like, look at these fashion t-shirts. You can be the most fashionable person at school by wearing your Electronic Games t-shirt. So you can buy that for $7.95 each. So again, they were trying to figure out, where video games fit into the rest of society at that time. And there is one, and I know I'm like butchering this magazine, flipping through it. I've got the mount for this camera kind of in the way here. So I'm going to be a little more careful or do this a bit more gingerly to find the ad that I wanted to show you, which is, again, you have to think about the era in which these magazines came out and the time in which we were living. But there is an ad for, I think it's in this one. It is for a Bic lighter that has Pac-Man on it. So even in game magazines, like, look at this. Here you go. Player's Guide to Mazes. Ugly, and beautiful all at the same time. But yeah, in magazines that really aimed at kids, they were also advertising things like, hey, go get your Bic lighter so you can go ahead and, I don't know, light up that sand candle that you got from the aunt you really don't like for Christmas or something like that. Oh, there's Frog. Announcing Frog. Not game related, but here you go. Trying to figure out how all this stuff fit together in our world. Frog. National Lampoon now offers the most prestigious shirt in America and a price that prestigious people can afford. Announcing Frog. So this was supposed to be going against Ralph Lauren and Polo. This is supposed to be going against Izod. This is National Lampoon making a joke shirt and selling it inside of, or advertising it inside of, a video game magazine. And I just happened to land upon this. I forgot it was in here. Favorite video game of all time. Yes, isn't that right, everybody? That's right, yes. Robotron 2084. Greatest video game of all time. It is my #1 desert island game. Absolutely blisteringly difficult to go ahead and play, and just an incredibly brilliant design from, of course, Eugene Jarvis. So these were the first video game magazines that I had at home when I was a kid. Electronic Games, lovely. Now, video game magazines were also important because back then, these are the magazines that we used to learn how to actually program. So this is what really got me started, my love for programming video games. Compute Gazette was the magazine that catered to the Commodore VIC-20, which was the machine that we could afford as kids. Some of my other friends had the Commodore 64, those rich kids that had the mighty Commodore 64. So, in the VIC-20, we had 5 kilobytes of RAM. I did a whole episode on the VIC-20 before. Definitely go check it out. We'd go through a lot of games that were really important for people that grew up playing on the VIC. But I remember, having a paper route, and then every month I would stop by this delicatessen in New York where I grew up and continue to wait for Compute Gazette to show up. You'd get that home, and not only was it teaching us about how to program, it was, or teaching us, what was the new technology, what games were available. But each magazine came with games that you could type in, right? So here we go. Sky Fox, that was a great game, by Electronic Arts. The first thing I would always do is run right here and see, okay, which games do they have in the magazine for me being a VIC-20 kid. Sleuth was one of them right there, so page 39. So we'll head on over to page 39. And this is an intriguing game for the Commodore 64 and unexpanded VIC challenges your problem-solving capabilities, blah, 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 blah. And so you would read about this here, and then you could go to the back of the magazine, and what you would have then is the code that you would then type in to start programming Sleuth into your Commodore VIC-20 or Commodore 64. Now, the big problem that, you know, a lot of us had when we first got, you know, these computers at home is we didn't necessarily are able to afford the storage medium to save those games. So the Commodore 64 and the Commodore VIC-20 had their data set recorder that used cassette tapes that allowed you to go ahead and save the games that you were typing in. But for the first few months, we didn't have that. So you had to convince your parents just leave the machine on overnight because you'd spend hours typing in these games into BASIC in your, I mean, look at these sheets of numbers. So you would type all this stuff in, you'd go ahead and run, and then would throw up a syntax error, and you're like, damn it. And it would tell you which, you know, line you made the error on. So you'd have to go back through the code, figure out what error you made, adjust that, retype it, run it again. Bam, another error. So you probably spend another hour just debugging your horrible typing skills as you, you know, to be able to play the game. Then you'd play it for 10 minutes, and then it was time for bed, right? And so you would, hopefully you were able to keep it on. If not, you shut it off, and the next day, you turn the machine back on and type stuff back into it again until you could save up for a storage medium. But this was the magazine that really fostered my love of computer science and started my kind of career in video games and learning to program. And what was so wonderful about the machine, I think I mentioned this in the Vic episode as well, and these magazines, is that you really felt powerful as a kid because you were just typing this code in, and then this game would execute. And then as you started to play around with it, you'd say, wait a minute, if I change this number, oh, I got more lives. If I change this number, I got different colors, right? And this is how we learned to program. No formal education in it, just typing in, you know, games out of these types of magazines and starting to play and learning how to program. Really, really wonderful. So the Compute Gazette series is really the one that means probably the most to me because it's what set forward my trajectory in the games industry, in the computer industry. Now, my good buddy Mike Micah, he has the entire Compute Gazette collection, leather bound, the entire thing. I already told him, you know, got to leave it to me and you will, man. I'm sorry. That's, you know, I'll come fight your family for it. All right. This, you know, again, a lot of hand-drawn art in here. Look at these styles. Look at that hair. That is straight up 80s hair. I mean, everything about this just screams the period of time that these magazines came out. And look at these expansion cartridges that we had here. There was things like, oh, let me go ahead and buy a cartridge that will go ahead and create an 80-column display instead of a 40-column display. And people were paying hundreds of dollars for these things that we completely take for granted today, right? Here we go. Take any two for $4.95 each. We've got it. Oh yeah, Zork and Zork 2 right in there. Summer Games, that was a great one. They had the Epix games. Those were awesome back in the day. Here we go. The music construction set. Electronic Arts had a whole series of construction set type of games and environments. This one being music, and it's the end of Dinkity Dink Dink. But look at the graphics on this thing. You know, the audio, yes, it was really advanced when you're on a Commodore 64. The SID chip still sounds amazing today. People that really know how to go ahead and bend that audio processor, right, in the Commodore 64 can do amazing things with it, including voice synthesis. VIC-20, not so much. I think it was 4 square waves or something like that. Pretty crazy. There you go, Night Mission Pinball. So you've got all this art in the page and this one tiny little screen down in the corner. So very different than the way we're allowed to go ahead and advertise and sell video games today. Apparently, this company is going to help you get a bull running out of your computer. Oh, it's CompuServe. It's going to help you get the most out of it. A running bowl, this is like Mega Man cover art. Really? Doesn't that remind you a little bit? With a lightsaber too? Oh, that's ridiculous. But they didn't care. This is what it looked like, right? So these magazines, again, this was not just about playing video games. This wasn't just about the technology that's coming out. These are the magazines that those of us that grew up in this era used to learn how to program video games and started our careers in the games industry. Compute Gazette and Compute. And the great thing too is if you go to archive.org, they backed up so many of copies of these. So you can go back through, leaf through these archives and understand, what was going on in the world at that time and the magazines that we used to learn to program games and get into this industry. All right. Now we're going to jump into another set of magazines that I absolutely love too. These are the Retro Gamer magazines. Now these are more modern magazines, right? These were not ones that came out in the 80s and 90s, but Retro Gamer magazine is, I think, in my opinion, probably the best retro game periodical out there. Now they have digital versions. You can buy these, at newsstands here in the US, well, globally, but it's a UK-based publication, which means that the magazines are close to $30 now if you buy them here in the US. Fortunately, they make them available digitally. So if you have a tablet, or a PC, you can actually go in and get these magazines, thumb through them, and they're wonderful. And they really go ahead and dig through, the retro game scene. They've got the back to the 80s. They do the 90s, 2000s. They interview industry, luminaries and people that drove the industry as well. They have a lot of guest, authors that contribute as well. And they just go back through and they really dig into the retro scene. And they have all kinds of special edition magazines as well. Ones that are built around very specific years. So if you have a particular memory or fond memory of playing a game in a particular age, you could probably find a Retro Gamer magazine that just goes over all the games for that year. So it's a really nice touch. In fact, for the holidays, look at that. If for the gamer in your life, maybe go ahead and find a copy of Retro Gamer magazine from their, for their important gaming years and give that to them. That would make a wonderful gift, I think. I would love that. So yeah, so Retro Gamer magazine, again, this is a UK import, but in my opinion, the best magazine to cover retro gaming. And they go into all of the technical, the technical issues and esoteric information about a variety of consoles, over the years. And they even have special buyer's guides, collecting guides, and things like that. So really excellent publication. And of course, in this era, they're doing screen caps and things like that. So we don't have the same type of, handheld photos of arcade screens and CRTs that we saw with the earlier magazines. So much more professionally done, much more modern. So this one's really fantastic. Now, this version of the magazine, this physical one, actually came with a DVD that, or a CD-ROM that included an Amiga emulator and a bunch of Amiga games, utilities. They stopped doing that. You really don't find magazines anymore, if you can find them, that come with, CDs or things like that on them, right? It's really just the magazine itself. But really an awesome publication that just leans into why video games are amazing and the whole history of retro games. Just really cool. All right, let's see what this this is probably a specky here. What was this one here? Don't believe the hype. As a bitter antidote to the recent sugary sweet top 100 games countdown, John Foster vents his spleen about 30 of the most overrated and overhyped games of all time. Retro Gamer, meanwhile, wisely keeps their heads down. And so they go through and they talk about games that may have been beloved during their era, but maybe weren't as good as we remember them to be. And this is what I love about this magazine. They don't just have nostalgia for video games and just kind of, say everything was wonderful, they'll go in and tell you, yeah, it may not be as wonderful as we remember them. Retro Gamer Magazine, this is really, really awesome. If you can find it physically and are willing to spend, again, close to $30 here in the U.S. on each one, fine. If not, digitally is the way to go. Really, really cool. All right, that's Retro Gamer Magazine. Now, of course, you know, most of these magazines in my collection are kept in the archive, but anybody that's watching this right now, you grew up looking at Nintendo Power, right? That was the magazine that so many of us just could not wait to go ahead and get our hands on. This one's a little bit later. This is from 1989, right? So this is about 4 years after the NES launched here in the US. But, you know, Nintendo really nailed this format of the corporate fanzine, right? So this was about getting you primed for the games that were going to be coming out, helping you get through the games that you currently had, giving you exclusive insight into, you know, Nintendo's inner working, which it was a mystery, right? Like, it was, everybody wanted to go into the Wonka factory that was and still is Nintendo, and this was the closest you could get, right, to doing that. But again, this is the era. Fill this thing out, cut it out, send it in to do, you know, whatever it is, a contest, get your high score in, you know, what have you. And what was also great about this too is they would have these pull-out posters you could hang on your wall, and they would have some really in-depth walkthroughs as well, so you didn't have to go ahead and buy, you know, a very specific, you know, tip or tricks guide like Video Games Tips and Tricks, which there were a whole bunch of them, and we're not going to cover this because I have so much more to go through. But yeah, there was a whole genre of and collection of tips and tricks magazines as well that you could pick up. But Nintendo Power used to include a lot of that, especially for some of their key games in Nintendo Power magazine. And you had, again, you know, here we go, Mega Man 2, the best Mega Man, of course, still to this day, still the best Mega Man. And here you go, it's giving you strategies for how to go ahead and make your way through different levels, the Chariot Challenge, and also include a lot of awesome artists' art, right? So not just video game art, but, you know, artist interpretation of the game. So really just absolutely loving. You know what I'm talking about. If you grew up playing Nintendo, you had Nintendo Power. And the cool thing was, you know, Nintendo Power used to come to kids' homes. If you basically registered your Nintendo, it would show up for free at first, right? Because it was the Nintendo Fun Club newsletter is what it was before Nintendo Power. And then, of course, it branched out into this. So even though this was the magazine made by the company selling you those games and selling you that hardware, and we couldn't wait to get these right at home. So really just amazing, and definitely worth digging them back out. If you have some in your collection, or a family member has them and you haven't spent any time with them recently in the last few years, dig them back out. This is the time of year to do it, right? That time of year where we're nostalgic for our past, when you know, it's the at least here in the North America, you know, region, it's getting colder now, and, you know, people are kind of tucking away. It gets darker a little bit earlier, right? It takes you back to kind of, you know, when you were a kid. So it's really awesome to go ahead and pick this back up and just kind of reminisce about that era when all of this was magic, right? And there was no immediate information at your fingertips. It all came once a month in 60 pages of thin papered, glossy colored magic. Just really amazing. There's Nestor. They're talking about the top 30, Dragon Warrior. Look at all of these beautiful pieces of artwork and paper. So, you know, look, I mean, Nintendo Power was really important to, as I said, to the industry and to a lot of us growing up playing. And one of the things that I always said, you know, when I started my career in games is, man, someday I'm going to get into a Nintendo Power magazine. Someday I'm going to get into a Wired magazine. Like, you know, that's when you know you made it, when you have your name in a magazine like this. And I have to say that I was able to achieve that goal. And I believe it was the last or the second to last edition of Nintendo Power ever made. And it was for the Art of Video Games exhibition that I curated for the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And so that one was so meaningful that I got multiple copies of it, but then I took one copy and I had it framed, and I have that one hanging in my house because I'm like, childhood dream accomplished. Went ahead and got that done. So I was very grateful. So thank you, Nintendo and Nintendo Power, for doing it. DuckTales, of course, one of the greatest video games of all time, and one of the most iconic, theme songs of all time. Really, really amazing. And the remake that they did of it, it's beautiful. In fact, it's Digital Eclipse that went ahead and did the Disney Saturday Morning a collection that has the original DuckTales and DuckTales 2 in it. Fantastic game. And then, of course, Capcom went ahead and did the remaster of it. Beautiful art, but really kept all the same mechanics, same levels. Really, really amazing. So, all right. So that was Nintendo Power. Again, if you grew up playing video games, man, during this era, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Iconic. One of the greatest of all time. Oh, here we go. They are advertising the compact video game system known as the Game Boy. And what is it coming with? Tetris, of course, the mighty, mighty Tetris. I had the really good fortune of interviewing Hank Rogers on one of the game industry legends interviews that I do here on the AWS for Games channel. And at the GameSpeed Summit about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had the chance to finally meet Alexei Pajitnov and Maya Rogers, Hank Rogers' daughter, who is the president of the Tetris company, and got to spend some time with them reminiscing about their incredible adventures, which were chronicled, of course, in the Apple TV movie. And it just, again, another kind of childhood, Chekhov. Let me go ahead and meet the guys and gals that created Tetris, and was able to go ahead and do that. So really fantastic. Super Mario Brothers Super Show. Terrible and amazing all at the same time, right? So that's what you got with Nintendo Power. It was more than just Nintendo games. It was hints, tips, tricks, what's coming up next. The hardware that's going to be coming out, shows that they did, your high scores, asking questions, getting posters, getting your walkthroughs. Amazing. And you'll notice too, there really isn't any other advertising inside of this magazine. It was pure Nintendo magic inside of Nintendo Power. That was Nintendo Power. All right. So I say this stuff a lot. I'm like, oh, this one was one of my favorites. This is one of my favorites. Here's another, set of favorites, right? Die Hard Game Fan Magazine. Now, when this, I'm going to take a sip of this iced vanilla latte right here. Need a little caffeine. Like I said, I'm running on about 3 hours of sleep right now after taking the red eye back from an event. But I want to make sure I didn't miss an episode of Rewind, and make sure that I could sit here and talk to you and share some of the stuff that I love about games. And I'm sure you love some of this too. Hopefully you do, and that's why you're watching. Okay, so Die Hard Game Fan was a really interesting publication because it was insane a little bit. This was the era where we had like the personalities of the reviewers come out, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. This was also when desktop publishing was really getting into full swing, right? In the computer industry and in the publishing industry. And so what you're going to see here is an explosion of clip art, of unmatched fonts, of justification of text not lining up correctly, and just the overuse and saturation of game art in every layout here. It was an assault on your eyes, and it was awesome. And also, you look at how thick these magazines were. I mean, these right here, how many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 game fans here. And if you just drop these, I mean, it's shaking the whole editing desk right now, because this, like this one right here on the top, what are we looking at? I don't even know if I have a page count on the back because of all the ads. Well, I mean, back here, 218 pages in a monthly publication. There's a reason for that too. We're going to take a look at that in a minute. But these are some of my favorite issues of Die Hard Game Fan. And one in here that I've used multiple times. There's a quote in here. We're going to look at that one. And then this one, oh my goodness, the Virtual Boy. This was the Virtual Boy. Now, one of the things about Game Fan Magazine too was they loved everything. Like everything was going to be amazing and the biggest thing, right? And so to that end, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put these other ones aside for a moment. And we're going to go take a look at this edition of Die Hard Game Fan with the Jaguar out of the cage for the first time, the Atari Jaguar. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get over to the Jaguar section. But when I told you this was a colored assault and filled with clip art and filled with crazy fonts, here we go. The editorial zone apparently being held to that page by rivets because it's so compelling that it needed it. The reason these magazines were so dense at the time is, I mean, it's just ads. You know, we're finding, here we go, ads after ads. I would say probably half the magazine were ads, but that was part of the fun. I mean, look at this. We're chewing up the competition bit by bit. Never launched Tiny Toons, right, which was a shame. Raiden was actually a really good home conversion of one of my favorite vertical shooters in the arcade. But yeah, inside came with Cybermorph, right? But it's that in-your-face, super explosive advertising. But you can see, look, here we go. Hocus Pocus. Travel with thy controller in hand to a land where cheaters prosper. So tips and tricks. Look at the background, like on these things, right? So it's overloading of different fonts, different colors, mashup of game art. It was crazy, right? It was crazy. And in the best sense, I mean that, right? It was truly just, again, that cacophony of color. But, you know, we'll get past the ads here so we can start to get to some of the editorial. I mean, it's directories and, you know, listings there and then more ads. And then here we go. Now we're at Viewpoint. And when I said this was the era of kind of the character-based, you know, reviewers, we have, I think it's Skid Row, Sergeant Gamer, Kaylee's, and Kid Fan. So they didn't go by their actual name in this. Because a lot of times, I'm not saying it for Die Hard Game Fan, but people would pull double duty, right? And have multiple personas so they could go ahead and have at least 4 or 5 reviewers of each game. Even if they didn't have that many reviews to go and review all the games, right? Sushi X is one that people will remember as well. And you're like, you know, who is Sushi X? And it's like, well, Sushi X was, I believe, like a group of people, right, that put together information that it came out as them. And I'm not sure if it was here or in EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly. So again, I'm only on about 3 hours of sleep here. So, you know, you can only retrieve so much and page out that information efficiently. But what they would do is they would give you, you know, a little paragraph for each of, you know, their review of the game, and then they'd score it by percentages. And then, of course, they would pick the game of the month. And the game of the month, surprise, surprise, is Cybermorph. Cybermorph being the pack-in game with the Atari Jaguar. And I'm going to show you why that was funny. And the quote that I pull out all the time is pretty funny. So here we go. In this game, it's either them or you. I assume they mean that you'll be toast. Very good. Then they also had their comics, right? And this started really with, well, not started with, but really leaned to it was Nintendo Power, right? So it was Howard and Nestor. So it was Howard Phillips and his nemesis Nestor. Howard Phillips, of course, a real person who worked at Nintendo, was kind of their games guru. Young guy, always wore a bow tie. And you would have that, this monthly, you know, comic that came inside of your Nintendo Power magazine. And, you know, Die Hard Game Fan did something similar, right? So this is the Monitor instead of the Minotaur. And Postman there. And they would do these, you know, crazy, absurd comics that would be right there. And I mean, there you go, right? There's Monitor. I mean, look at the layout on this thing, right? It's so, I mean, it's explosive, right? I mean, if you're hungover, don't read, right, these books because your brain is gonna implode. But here you go, Toe Jam and Earl Panic on Funkatron. The side-scrolling follow-up to Toe Jam and Earl, of course, was on the incredible Sega Genesis, and a really fun game. They did a remake of it not too long ago as well. That was just lovely, really, really lovely. Eternal Champions and Lunar, but okay. So I said, yeah, you know, it's explosive and it's just, you know, this, you know, color just explode all over the page. But they were trying, right, to make each layout related to the content, right, that they were talking about. So they're using the same borders and stuff, and specific to Lunar. Joe and Macluck, you've got this one made out of dinosaur bones. So, they were really working to align the style with the games that they were discussing. And this was, that really kind of earlier growth era of desktop publishing, right? So we were trying out a bunch of stuff. I mean, this is back also time you would get 1,000 fonts on a CD-ROM and clip art that you would use, right? And all that stuff. So, all right, let's go all the way over to the Jaguar. The Jaguar review, because that is, here we go. I think we're back here. Where are we? Yeah, like I said, there's 280 pages you got to thumb through here. So this was, really good value, even though, a lot of it were ads. But like I said, ads were part of it. Seeing this game here, right, Warbirds, the ad for this here, I was like, oh, what the hell is that? Had a links. It was amazing. Warbirds really is one of the best kind of flying games on handhelds from that entire era. I don't care which system it was on. Warbirds on the Lynx was freaking awesome. And that's where I first discovered it. So here's your Jaguar's domain. This is Trevor McFerrin, the Crescent Galaxy. Cybermorph. And if you've ever played Cybermorph, and you know that this floating head pops up all the time, every time you do something wrong in the game, and just says, where did you learn to fly? Ouch. Where did you learn to fly? Ouch. And then and you can't shut it off. But it still was a fun game. It really was a fun game to play around with when you didn't have a whole hell of a lot for your Jaguar. So that's what you used. I think I passed the Jaguar review. Let's go and find it, because it is the closing line of this review. And good friend Frank Cifaldi, who was at the Portland Retro Game Expo and doing the Jaguar section there, when I was talking to him about what he was putting together for the show, I threw this quote at him, and he and I just started laughing, because it is a quite laughable quote. All right, where is it? Like we said, 280 some odd pages, so it's taking me a little time to find it. I could probably just go right to the front and see, right? But why do that? Where's the fun in doing that? I'd rather go ahead and have you sit here watching me flip through these. No, I'm not going to do that. Let me go to the front here. Let's find where the Jaguar... See, that's the other problem. Now I got to find the freaking... yeah, here we go. Table of contents 164 to 172. 65, 64. See, I thought that... Is it this one here? Let's see. Well, if I don't find it in this, it may have been in one where they were teasing it out. And it was basically, Atari is back. Come pet the cat. That was the quote that I wound up yanking out of one of these articles. So they were super fans of video games. It really comes through in the way they did their reporting. It was really a product, like a lot of these magazines are, of their era. And it was one I looked forward to every month, right? Because it was just so different than the other magazines that we had out there. There wasn't a lot of hand-drawn art or anything. It was them using the graphics and the elements from those games to inform their layouts. And again, as confusing as some of it could be, and difficult to read as well sometimes when you had, contrasting colors between the text and the background, it was still an awesome magazine to go ahead and get every month. And so so here again, some of my favorites there. Here was the Sega 32X version of Doom. My goodness, this one I think is even bigger. Yeah, this one's 200. This one is 218 pages. And then of course, like I said, Virtual Boy. Nights into Dreams. Yes, Nights into Dreams, one of my favorite games on the Sega Saturn. That's exactly right, everybody. They did a really awesome breakdown of that in here as well. So Die Hard Game Fan is what it was originally known as, and then it became Game Fan. So if you happen to find copies of these or copies of it online to read through, definitely worth your time checking out, because once again, it's a moment in time when we were not just exploring video games, but the technology that we were using to bring this information to the world. Pretty cool, right? So that's Die Hard Game Fan. All right, let's go on. When the mighty Dreamcast... Well, let me start with this one first. This one was the big one, right? Electronic Gaming Monthly. This was really just... This set the tone, set the pace for what game journalism really was and what it looked like. And again, these magazines, I mean, this thing is massive. This one was from November of 1993, issue number 53. This magazine clocked in, this particular issue clocked in at 386 pages of content. Now, a lot of ads for sure, but EGM did a really good job of doing honest reviews of their games. Sure, fans of video games, to be sure. You can't be in games journalism without being a fan of video games, but they were fair, right? In the way that they did their reporting, and the way that they did their reviews. And they also had, characters in here too. Yes, lots of ads, because the only way you had access to the pool of video game players was through these magazines. So the holidays are coming up. Companies have to go ahead and get their advertising out in front of gamers. And where are you going to put it? Yeah, you can put some of it in the Sunday morning kids section of, the newspaper and stuff, but that's not going to do the job. You got to get into one of these magazines. That is why it's so many ads in these. Wayne's World 2, I do not recommend. Here we go. Sonic Spinball. A lot of people like, Sonic Spinball, it's not a real Sonic game. I love Sonic Spinball, right? I'm not an apologist for it. I know what it is, but it is actually a really good game, I think, right? It is worth your time to taste, right? Is what I would say there. But again, chock full of information. And they would even do things like talk about the difference between the US and Japanese versions of games. Their review section was always really good and compelling. They did. Oh, I loved these too. These were envelope art. So, people that would go ahead and send them a letter, they would go ahead and draw this incredible artwork on the front of the envelopes. And if it was picked by the judges at EGM, it would be featured in a magazine. And so you got some really awesome pieces of art being done by readers of EGM and sending their stuff in on their envelope. Really, really cool. I hope some people that did that actually kept the envelopes or took pictures of it or something like that. Or it would have been great if EGM would put it in an envelope and send it back to them so they would have it, right? Really, really cool. All right. So, there it is again. Yes, that's right. The Warbirds on the Atari Lynx. And then this was much more... it was clear to understand, which the games of the month were, because they printed their big ass review number right there behind the text there. Sushi X, exactly right. Sushi X was an EGM character, and everyone else went by their real name. So you could go in and very quickly see which games are worth your attention, in terms of not just buying but reading about. And again, with this being so dense from a page perspective, they would last you a whole month, right? You would go through multiple reads. First news, you rip through, get right to reviews. Then you go through some of like the upcoming things. And then you go through and start reading some of the bigger editorials. And so this thing could last you, like I said, if not a month, a few weeks. And then you just go back and revisit it. I have these accessible to me because I go back and I revisit these from my past, right? Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. There's the 3DO. We did an episode on the 3DO as well. Of course, designed by our friend RJ Michael and his incredible business partner, Dave Needle, who unfortunately we lost, a few years ago. But they would have other sections in here like Next Wave. So it's telling you what's coming up and what's coming out from different regions. And again, if there are magazines that you had growing up or stories from it or memories you have about, using video or getting video game magazines, having in your life, Go ahead and let me know in the chat there. All right, Mansion of Hidden Souls. So this was, okay, so these are like your sponsored sections, right? So this is, Vic Tokai special feature, right? So typically those were paid for by the companies so they could advertise their games. Look at that, Secret of Mana. What a beautiful 2-page layout of Secret of Mana. Phenomenal game. Of course, phenomenal game, but couldn't best the greatest JRPG of all time, which is Chrono Trigger. That's right. Not so controversial, maybe for some people. Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is where it was at. And then they would have, sports games lumped together, and then they would have fighting games lumped together, and you would get these guides in here as well. This guide right here, though, is for the Sega Activator. So the Activator for Eternal Champions, the Activator was a peripheral that Sega had created, and it was a plastic, I think it was like a hexagon or something that was on the ground in front, and you stood in the middle of it, and it had infrared sensors that would basically move up and then detect, the ceiling, and then it would detect when your hand or your foot broke the connection. And that's how you were getting into the game. So before we had full motion body tracking, before we had the Kinect, before we had iToy, any of those things, this is the way they were trying to get you into the game. And so what they had in this layout here, right, for Eternal Champions, was the Activator ring layout, so you knew where to go ahead and punch high or low, and which command would throw the different attacks. So again, the editorial was leaning in a bit to the innovation of the time, which was the Activator. I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, so this is EGM. Again, really they really set the gold standard and the longevity for game journalism in this era of magazines. It was them and GamePro. Those two magazines were probably the most widespread, universally loved set of magazines. And while I loved GamePro and I loved the faces that they would use to rate their games, I was always just impartial to EGM. Something about it just resonated more with me, the way they did their layouts and the way they did their editorials. So yeah, just really awesome. It's a Wild Quest. R-Type 3, Third Lightning. Yeah. Clay Fighter. Clay Fighter was fine. Here we go. The top 10 reasons to play Clay Fighter. Interact with radioactive materials right in your home. Tiny was recently cleared of allegation of steroid use. Taffy's amazing resemblance to Al Gore. Okay. Computer screen turns your face a really cool and disgusting shade of green. Chicks dig bad Mr. Frosty. You won't be condemned for mutilating them. It's not like they're mortal or something. There you go. Nice little dig there at Mortal Kombat. Slimier than your math teacher. You can't poke your eye out with it. Everyone needs a friend named Blob. And the number one reason to play Clay Fighter. You tell us. Okay, this is a feedback. Send us a postcard telling your number one reason for playing Clay Fighter. The 10 best reasons will be printed on our next ad, and the winner will receive, for the first place prize, a brand new 27-inch stereo RCA color track, portable television set, and 3 Interplay SNES games. Yes, all right. And second place, 3 Interplay SNES games and a Clay Fighter baseball cap. And 10th place prizes, a Clay Fighter poster and temporary tattoos. There you go. All right, so that's what you got in this era of magazines, right? Really, really cool. And then, of course, even then, these companies that were distributors of video games, they would put the games into the magazine with prices that were locked in. Those are the prices for the month. So at least you knew, your parents knew what it was going to cost when they needed to buy you. Or if you were a little bit older like me, what it was going to cost me to go buy them for myself. Coupons in there from software, etc. If you know what that is, you know. If you know, you know. There we go. Look at that. The Activator and the Menacer, right? Yeah, just this whole era was just crazy. And it's so awesome. The 3DO, this is the one that I had, the FC1. Really great system. Play Fighter Tournament Fighters, Lost Vikings. Yeah, so here you go. This is what EGM was all about. Beautiful color layout. So you can see still a lot of colors, still a lot of style, right? Still a lot of use of graphics for the games, but a bit less cumbersome than Die Hard Game Fan magazine was, right? So EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly. This one of the two greatest video game magazines of that era. Was Electronic Gaming Monthly. Okay, and then the last series of magazines we're going to talk about. Actually, before I go into the last series of them, I will also say, as the kind of a little stopping off point, was the official Sega Dreamcast magazine. Now, the Dreamcast was the only console that I actually took off time from work to go ahead and get. And I told my wife at the time, we were newly married, I said, this is what I'm doing. On this day, I am going to take off a day or two. And I'm really just asking to be left alone so I could go get this Dreamcast, get it home, and dig through, you know, the incredible games that they were offering. When the first time I saw Sonic Adventure, just absolutely blew my mind, right? The fact that it could then connect to the internet, insane, right? So these three issues here. This one was the teaser piece that you could get by going into the store there. That's why it's issue 0. And then the editors would talk about, you know, what they were building here. And this was basically kind of like the advance notice of what the Dreamcast was going to be, and kind of wet your whistle for what you were going to be experiencing there. And so this was just awesome, right? You got this ahead of the console, and it just ramped up that anticipation to such a crazy ass degree. It was pretty awesome. And then, of course, the Dreamcast comes out. Look at that, man. The advertising for Dreamcast was so on point in that era. Just loved it. And then, of course, so this was the issue 0. And then, of course, this was the premiere issue. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. 56K modem, 19 games at launch, 128-bit graphics. Oh my gosh. All amazing. And I believe still, for a 24-hour period, it may be still the biggest day in entertainment history from a revenue perspective, adjusted for cost, right, in the game space. Maybe not, but it still feels like it was. And they talk about the technology here, weighing in at 1,000 megabytes, the GD-ROM. Now, of course, the GD-ROM, I was just having this conversation with some colleagues while I was away attending the AWS and Meta WebXR Hackathon. There's going to be a whole video coming out later on the AWS for Games channel about this event, which was phenomenal. But we were talking about why the Dreamcast was really up against a massively formidable opponent in the Sony PlayStation 2. And one of the key reasons why the PlayStation 2 really kind of took off was their DVD-ROM. And if you look back during the launch window for the PlayStation 2, there was one piece of software that was attached to one-to-one sales of PlayStation 2 for, I think, almost their first initial run. And it was the Matrix movie. It was a 1-to-1 attach rate. Everybody that bought it in Japan bought the Matrix movie with it. And I mean, so many reasons why that happened, right? Matrix came out in 99. Just crazy science fiction movie. Changed the way we thought about science fiction, all that other stuff. But the PlayStation 2 was also the best and inexpensive DVD player you could get for the home. Sega decided to go with this proprietary format called the GD-ROM, right? So instead of 640 megs of storage on the disc, you could get basically 1,000 megabytes, right? 1 gig on the disc. But DVD, 4.7 gigs on the disc, and it could play DVD movies. The Dreamcast could not. And it was one of the things that really solidified the PlayStation 2 early on against the Dreamcast. But if you look at games on the Dreamcast versus PlayStation 2 in the beginning, Dreamcast blew it away. In my opinion, Dreamcast had the best games, and including the best versions of games. And back then, when the Dreamcast launched, they were doing things like being able to go in and connect the Neo Geo Pocket Color to the Dreamcast for some kind of cross-play functionality. You had the visual memory unit that allowed you to take it out of the Dreamcast controller and take little micro games and the little Chos you found in the Cho garden and play with them like Tamagotchis and stuff like that, right? Just an exceptional machine. Really just years ahead of its time in terms of thought. And we all know the way Dreamcast went. We also know the love that the Dreamcast community has for the Dreamcast today still. But this Dreamcast magazine really just, nailed it all, right? It got you right in the mood for getting that Dreamcast home, sitting down with it. And I did. I spent a couple of days just pouring through those games. Really phenomenal. There's, of course, Yuji Naka in the middle there. So, yeah, just everything about these magazines, official Dreamcast magazines, were just lovely, professional. They felt a bit older, they felt a bit more mature in the way they approached their content. If you're a Dreamcast fan, you have access to any of these or find archives of them online, definitely worth your time digging through them. Lovely. All right, we're going to go on to the last magazine set. And this, I believe, as I said, you had EGM, you had Die Hard Game Fan, you had Game Pro, you had Dreamcast magazine, you had the PlayStation magazine, and all these other ones. You had Game Informer. But this, in my opinion, was the greatest of all. These were Next Generation. Next Generation really felt like the prosumer game magazine. And so many of the people that worked on Next Generation stayed not only in the industry, but even left games journalism at some point and went on to run different divisions of some of the biggest companies in the industry. So like Chris Charla, who was over there, Microsoft, who was basically the founder behind the ID at Xbox. You have Mike Micah, who, co-founded Other Ocean and Digital Eclipse. And Digital Eclipse, which just got acquired by Atari, right? Was over there, and a whole lot more. So many good friends and people still in the industry that were at Next Generation made their way on to not necessarily bigger or better, but other places in the industry that are continuing to still innovate and do awesome stuff today. So I love it. Now, what I did love about Next Gen was, like I said, it's kind of like the prosumer version of a game of a video game magazine, because they would not only talk about the video games and what's really cool, they would talk about the business of games. They would talk about the technology advancements of games, not just which new system's coming out, but why that new system was going to be bigger, why it was going to be better, what standards were we going to be looking at. The other thing they did was they brought the console wars right to the front of these magazines. So I remember, quick side story for you. I was at Sun Microsystems. I had spent 16 years at Sun. I spent my last 10 years at the company as the chief gaming officer at Sun. And we were building all these Java technologies that allowed, games like, Minecraft and all these things to kind of make their way out into the world. We founded javagaming.org, which is still an ongoing concern today, and still kind of the repository for Java game development out there in the world. But at the time that I was creating the rationale for Sun to go into the game space was because of articles like this. Because at the time, Microsoft and Sun Microsystems were the two biggest competitors in the computer industry. And I used these magazines and the information here as justification to say, this is where they've kind of tipped their hand on strategy. So maybe we go ahead and dig into that a little bit. And the information here helped me to go ahead and create the rationale to build forward my career in the games industry as well. So thanks, Next Gen. Appreciate you. But Gates on Games. Was Microsoft planning to take over the games industry? And what the hell does Bill Gates know about video games? Anyway, on page 6. And so we'd go in and let's see what Bill Gates had to say at that time about getting into the games industry. And you can see here, when I told you I use this as material for my work, there's my highlighting marks for the data that I would wind up pulling out. And what did he have to say? We saw the embarrassment of how hard it was to install games and the conflicts between DOS games and productivity applications after we shipped Windows 3.1. So part of our goal was making the PC a more stable platform, having the games not destabilize the other things you were doing. And so these interviews, again, wouldn't just be about game development. It was about the leaders right in the industry and what they were doing, the strategies they were thinking about, how they thought about the games industry. And they talk about Windows 95. And they go in here. My goodness, I completely forgot that I had highlighted all of these. So you're getting a sneak peek into my process, for, at the start of my more professional side of the games industry here. But they talk about, no, we're going to lean into PC. We're going to lean into our Windows operating system and so on and so forth. Of course, we all know what happened then. What happened then was the battle begins. The PlayStation, Project X. Project X is what the Xbox is originally known as. Nintendo 64, can it survive? The Dreamcast, can it be stopped? The console wars explode. Sega's next big thing. Does PlayStation live up to the hype? Can 3DO keep up? Graphics to Die For was about the GPU race that was happening in the PC space. And then, of course, the Sega Saturn. You've watched the commercials, now read the facts. So again, what Next Gen was doing was not just looking at the industry and saying we're fans. They were dissecting the industry, talking to the leaders within it, understanding what the strategies were, and basically allowing us to see what was coming next. Incredible publication, really like heavy stock paper, really bound exceptionally well, so you don't have to worry about pages kind of falling out of it as they age. And if you know people that really collect, video game magazines, more than likely they'll have a complete run of Next Gen. Like, this was the pinnacle of the prosumer game magazine here in the West. Over in the UK, Edge was basically the sister publication to it. So it was Edge and Next Generation here in the US. But let's go ahead and take a look through this one. The battle begins. In fact, I think I may have even used this image on an old presentation that I had done, and I replaced some of the graphics with other companies or other logos to fit what I needed to, the story I needed to tell. So this is pretty awesome. All right, let's go ahead and look at the battle begins, right? And you'll see what I mean about Next Generation Magazine. Happy days are here again. They're talking about E3. Let's see who was editor at the time. No hype, all game. Oh, I think I just tore that a little bit. There's Homeworld by Sierra Studios and Relic. Awesome. So here we go. Yeah, this is GT Interactive, and they're talking about the shareware release of Wolfenstein 3D. And I have just interviewed John Romero on the last episode of Game Industry Legends, which you should also find on the AWS for Games channel. Really phenomenal discussion with John, talking about the creation of id, the work that he's done, and we really dug into some of those stories from his past. It's just a lovely conversation to have with John Romero. All right, so let's see who was on the staff here at this time. So the editor-in-chief was Chris Charla over at Microsoft. And fun fact for me, not necessarily for you, but I'll share it anyway, is that Chris Charla was the first person that gave me my first speaking opportunity professionally in the games industry at the Consumer Electronics Show in 2000. And I was sitting next to the legendary Dave Perry, and I could not believe my incredible luck. So thanks there, Chris. You're awesome, buddy. You're awesome. Yeah, who else did we have in here? Chris Charla, Kathy Lou, Tom Russo, who also another awesome friend who, where's Tom? There we go. Tom is also over at Digital Eclipse doing incredible work there. He's also, one of the people that brought G4 to the world and everything. Incredible folks over there. Neil West, Mike Wilmoth, Lisa Cheeto, Christian Svensson, another really good friend. Christian's over at PlayStation right now with former Capcom. Amazing. Yeah, Christian, everybody needs to get their chimes in there. But just, again, these are people, like I said, that were part of this magazine that made their way into other areas of the games industry. This is, when I say the prosumer side of it, this is what it was about. Not just games, but the business of games. So here we go. This is their index there. Oh, I think also, let's see if they did have that there. They used to always have some funny sort of piece of content that they would... Yeah, let's see. This month we celebrate the bravest man on CGDC, excuse me. Matt Aquaman Seymour. On to Atlanta. Special thanks to the Vortex TR and BH. Would also like to thank the Atlanta Braves for the use of the golf cart. Next time, they'll ask first. Favorite E3 moment? Jude scaling the wall at the Georgian Terrace. Eat your heart out, Laura. So right down here, super small to see, they would always include every month some sort of inside joke, some sort of esoteric information that they were basically signaling back to each other. I kind of liken that to the equivalent of animators sneaking in a frame of animation or some in-joke into a movie that other animators would know and kind of get the joke for. And this is what Next Gen used to do. Love that. So yeah, every month you'd look down here in the corner, right underneath the editorial staff and the contact list, and they would always have some sort of in-joke down there. Really, really funny. Okay, so here we go. More ads. But you can see, look at the layouts of this, right? This is more akin to like a Wired magazine than it was to like an EGM or a diehard game fan magazine, right? And so you'd have these really wonderful in-depth conversations there. Ooh, the 3D, the Voodoo 2 3D blaster. Amazing. Let's see. Yeah, just awesome. E3, and they'd walk through E3 when E3 was a going concern. Right now it was canceled for next year. Hopefully we'll see it return in some form. E3 meant a lot to so many of us that grew up in the games industry and working within it. It was the place to be. But of course, we have so many different conferences, right? From Gamescom to GDC and on and on and on. GamesBeat, right? So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. All right, so the best and worst of E3. You can see very clean layout, very professional, really a prosumer kind of approach to this. This machine right here they're talking about here was pretty interesting. This is called, this was through VM Labs, but this was called the Nuon. And the Nuon was basically a chipset that allowed for game playing and interactive media. And they licensed it to a bunch of hardware manufacturers. You would buy a DVD player with a Nuon chipset in it, so you could go ahead and play video games on it. So the idea was to create a chipset that became common, like the VCR did, as a common implementation or common standard that you would then bake into other devices. And then that way, a game developer could write the game once, it would run across a bunch of platforms simultaneously. The 3DO would lean in to do this as well. And the 3DO the concept was to create the reference architecture. Then other companies would build 3DO players, much like the VCR standard. But the new one was a chipset. This is by Motorola. The reason I bring it up, just flipping through here, is, of course, they have a version of Tempest done by Jeff Minter. If you ever played a Jeff Minter game from Llamasoft, all the way back from like Grid Runner and Attack of the Mutant Camels to Polybius and all of the different Tempest remakes he's done, the most psychedelic, trippy, awesome, visceral, audio overload games you can play. And Tempest 2K on the Jaguar, still one of the best versions of that game ever made. All of them done by the incredible Jeff Minter. So there you go, Dreamcast. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Oh, apparently somebody's opened up a can of in this version of the magazine, or in that ad there. There you go. Let them eat lead. Duke Nukem Time to Kill. The Console Wars of 1999. And then they go through and do these really great breakdowns of each one of the consoles and how they stack up against the other machines. They would interview people from those companies. They would create a point of view, and then they would stack them up against each other in the magazine. And these are still so much fun to go through and read, because their point of view and their analysis of them is still relevant, right? It still informs, especially if you're new to this era of gaming. Now, Project X, right? This was basically the, like I said, the nuanced stuff, but then what Microsoft was going to do. So Toshiba was the first hardware maker. So Project X wasn't the Xbox. I was mistaken. That showed up back in this one, Microsoft's Xbox. But you notice it kind of looks the same, right? So the Project X stuff, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, oh my goodness, maybe we're going to find this out right now. Maybe that is exactly what it was. So she was one of the first hardware makers to announce support for the Project X standard. You know, I have to take back what I said. This may be, this may, no. Project X had to have been a new one, because Microsoft didn't announce any of this until GDC. Like I said, folks, I'm on 3 or 3.5 hours of sleep right now, so the facts, hard to pull them all out. So that Project X had to be the new one, because this came right before the GDC announcement of the Xbox. And they may have conflated kind of both of those things. So the nuance there too. We know the Xbox came out one way or the other. Both of those machines, made it into market. Okay, there you go. So do your own research. No. So then you'd have alphas. So these are the games that are going to be coming out. There's Psygnosis, great, incredible company, of course. Did a lot of work early on in the days for Amiga, PlayStation, as well. Wipeout, one of the biggest ones that they'd ever done. Acquired by Sony, and then a bunch of good friends went over to work in the Sony R&D labs working on PlayStation platforms. But again, you can see the difference between this magazine and the diehard game fan, right? This was the one that, if you were concerned about what people thought of you reading about video games, you hold this one up and it looks more like a Wired magazine or tech magazine. So it was made certainly for an older audience, and one that grew up playing video games but never stopped, right? And again, the advertising was of its era, and we've learned a lot since then. Omicron, the Nomad Soul, and of course this game included the soundtrack by David Bowie, and David Bowie also appeared in the game as one of the characters. Here you go, 12 issues for $12. Look at that savings. It would have cost you only $71.88. Now it's $12. Oh, here's Tiny Tank, Up Your Arsenal. Yes, all of this really interesting humor there. Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit, right? This is back then, 1999. Dark Vengeance. Really just awesome to go back. There's Daikatana, right, from John Romero. Trespasser, of course. Trespasser was done by Seamus Blackley, who very famously was the person who said, look, let's make a game machine for artists, and kind of helped to drive that and get the right people together, including, Ed Fries and Kevin Bacchus and a bunch of others at Microsoft to go ahead and create the Xbox. Trespasser was interesting, though, because Trespasser, Seamus was trying to use real-world physics inside of this game. And unfortunately, when you're using real-world physics inside of a game, you shouldn't be able to lift that crate. You shouldn't be able to break it apart with, 2 swings of the hammer. You shouldn't be able to bust that door open. And so he found it to be a hindrance there. But really forward thinking and really just thinking about how to build real physics into gameplay. Pretty amazing. There's Blues, Space Circus, and then, I had one of these things. It was the most painful, ridiculous, piece of hardware. It was basically a seat with a giant subwoofer in the back and under your butt, and it was uncomfortable to sit on, and it would rock on top of the chair that you were on. It was terrible. Terrible. Unreal. Cliff Blazinski worked on that. We also interviewed him on the Game Industry Legends series as well, right there on the AWS for Games channels. Mission Impossible, International Soccer, Superstar Soccer 98, Sanitarium, really good. Might and Magic. What else do we have here? Burning Rangers. Yeah, one of the more unique and one of the last titles done for the Sega Saturn. Really, really fantastic. There we go. Space Bunnies Must Die. Always reminds me really of a jazz jackrabbit kind of a lean in design, right on the character there. But again, you can see just the difference between the other video game magazines and Next Generation. Next Generation truly was for people who grew up playing games and have now become a bit older and they're maybe in the industry. Once again, the editorial lessons that these professionals took away, they then employed in their jobs working across the industry and building, a lot of the games and systems that we enjoy today. Really, really lovely to go back and see them. And definitely, like I said, these magazines that I pointed out, it's worth going back and revisiting them to understand how we looked at games at the time that these made their way into the world. We don't have these anymore, right? Part of me says that's fantastic. We have all this information at our fingertips, but we're missing something by not having the physical artifact to hold in our hands, the things that we can kind of dog ear. In one of the issues I showed you where I was highlighting information that was important to me, I would go to these as reference materials for a professional job to make sure that I got the right information that I needed to go ahead and build things that I thought were going to be important for the industry. And so this was the Next Generation magazines. And so I have one last one I wanted to share with you, because as I was pulling out some magazines for this episode, I did come across one of these. This was Develop Magazine. This was in May of 2001. And this was the very first magazine that I was ever interviewed in. And I couldn't believe I had it in this stack of just general magazines, right? Stuff moves around a bit when you have a large collection, right? Things like that. And, being able to work in an industry that I care deeply for, and as deeply today as I did when I first started playing games and learning to program, to find your work kind of make its way out into the world for other people to see and read, that you can point to, was just incredibly rewarding. And this was part of this article here, this Net Companies Play Games. They used to think it was just for kids, but today's downtrodden web companies are looking to games for salvation. That's not exactly why we were doing the stuff we were doing at the time, right? We saw it as a real benefit for game developers. But right down here, it was Sun Microsystems, Macromedia, and Real Networks are all aggressively targeting the online 3D gaming space. And here's what I love about this was, there is a picture of the javagaming.org website, which looks very different today than it did then. I hadn't built a website before, but I needed to learn how to do it. So I just did it. Created all the graphics by myself, learned how to go and stand up the server, put everything together on my own, and was running this off of a server that we went ahead and tucked into a data center at Sun Microsystems, but didn't tell the folks running the data center what it was for. So we were able to punch out through the firewall and just run this rogue server that allowed us to go and establish the community that still exists today at javagaming.org. And we talked in here about the title of our section was Here Comes the Sun. Conversely, Sun Microsystems' Java gaming initiative seems to be less commercially motivated, or at least in the short term. Java has always contained a community-based aspect, so we have approached a group of industry experts to collaborate on building game APIs. It's leveraging not only Java 2D and 3D components, but all of those other pieces of Java we can utilize, as well as building brand new ones. Says Chris Melisinos, Sun's business development manager for Java. And that was my first quote, my first step into the games industry at the beginning of my professional career. And this was the magazine that's there. Looking up these things online as we all kind of go through our lives and we build the work that we're doing and we put ourselves out there is one thing. But to have it kind of, immortalized in this physical magazine that just surprised me finding it again. It's just something that we lose when it's all behind glass, right? Or it just sits out there as open data. So I encourage you, if you are a fan of video game history, if you're a fan of artifacts that demonstrate what the world was like at the time these magazines, these pieces of physical media made their way into the world, definitely go ahead and check them out, right? It's definitely worth your time. And it's like a paperback time machine. Takes you right back to those moments in time, relive all of those memories, and, have that held in your hand. So look, we went way over by 30 minutes today on this episode of Rewind. So I want to just say thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon. If you are a video game developer of any size, from AAA to indie, make sure you head on over to aws.amazon.com/GameTech to discover the products, solutions, and services that we offer to help you on your cloud game development journey. And if you're a beginner looking for a clear starting point to help you build a career or learn to produce games in the AWS cloud, we recommend you start with an AWS learning plan. This set of on-demand courses will increase your knowledge of game servers and game analytics and help grow your technical skills to solve real-world game development, compute, and analytics problems. And you can demonstrate your knowledge to the world by earning these digital badges. Head on over to aws.training/GameTech to start your AWS for Games learning plan today. And of course, I want to give a special shout out and thank you as always to Waterflame for allowing me to use his music here on Rewind. Make sure you head on over to his YouTube channel at Waterflame Music to check out his incredible work. And of course, lastly, if you care about preserving the history of video games as much as I do, make sure you head on over to the Video Game History Foundation's website at gamehistory.org. They're doing incredible work to preserve the history of our industry for future generations. And once again, I want to thank you for spending your Friday afternoon with me. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Go find some old video game magazines. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll see you next week on Rewind.